Office of Management and Budget in the Reagan administration. He was worried then about the state of our nation, but his worries have turned into an indictment of our nation's leaders, who he says have been for decades making mistakes, one after another, to the point where our nation is broke. Here's my recent interview with the former Reagan budget chief and the author of The Great Deformation, The Corruption of Capitalism in America, David Stockman. David, it's a big book, but I'll tell you something. I love this book. It really, talk about, it might take all summer to read the thing, but at least it's a great read. You start off, I want to start with the top of the book. You start off with the Blackberry Panic of 2008. You aren't happy about what happened.
No, that's really what motivated me to write the book. I think it's the Rubicon, because you had a Republican White House who basically threw away every principle of free markets and of financial responsibility and fiscal rectitude, for that matter, that the Republican Party ever had. They allowed Hank Paulson on the third floor of the Treasury with all his Goldmanites to basically do anything that was necessary to bail out the remaining firms on Wall Street. And I go through it and I demonstrate the rationale they gave was not true. It consisted of urban legends that I think after the fact we can document were gross exaggerations if they had any reality at all. We weren't heading for a Depression 2.0. This was not going to spread, in my view, beyond the canyons of Wall Street. AIG was not a contagious disease. It could have easily been put into bankruptcy. The Main Street banks, the community banks of the nation, were not in trouble because they did not engage in this kind of gambling with derivative securities and CDOs and the mortgage-backed subprime debt and so forth. So I think what I was trying to do is set the record straight, and unfortunately the Republican Party destroyed its reputation doing this. Why would they believe us anymore, or Republicans, when they say free markets are the way we have to run our economy, if we bailed out GM, AIG, and Wall Street, Goldman Sachs effectively, and Morgan Stanley on the Republican watch? It's a terrible point in history.
I want to remind people that not only in the introduction we talked, of course, about your name came up on a national basis when you were budget director in the Reagan administration, but after that you went to Wall Street and worked on Wall Street. So you know the inside of Washington and Wall Street, the two places that people seem to not trust anymore.
Yeah, those are the 7 words that you can boil my large book down to. Do not believe Washington or Wall Street. And they're again peddling a lot of illusions that everything is fixed, everything is better, and it's not. The Fed is a serial bubble machine. It's reflating this huge financial bubble for the 3rd time, and I think we're heading for another spill, just like with the dot-com crash, just like with the housing and the Wall Street crash that we had in 2007, 2008. Yeah. The Fed is the largest threat to the future of our economy and of sound prosperity that you can imagine. And I regret to say the people running it today, Bernanke and before him Greenspan, were appointed by Republicans. This is why I fear for the future of the country, because we have no conservative party left economically. Both parties are using essentially free lunch economics.
You've been making people within the Republican Party and the Democrats mad at you for as long as I can remember, back even in the Reagan days. You sound a little bit like Ron Paul.
Well, I'll tell you, I made the Democrats mad in the Reagan days because I called attention to the fact that spending was out of control and that we needed to free up our private economy and let it breathe and let it grow. That's why we wanted the rate cuts. But unfortunately, we didn't have enough troops on the Republican side to cut the spending, to shrink the welfare state. Ronald Reagan left it almost the same size as he found it. But we did have the big tax cuts, and that's where we got deficits out of control and the myth that developed that deficits don't matter. And so now I have to really call out the Republican Party, because the 3 things that they stood for historically, free markets, fiscal rectitude, and sound money, all 3 of them have been repudiated by several Republican administrations and several generations of Republican politicians on Capitol Hill over the last couple of years.
You go back, I mean, you've got FDR, you've got Nixon, you've got a whole crowd, you've got Fed chairmen, you've got just about everybody in the indictment. And so there's a lot of people, David, that are in the Washington political economic world, and they're calling you every name under the book, that you're ranting, you're, all kinds of things. What's your reaction to all of theirs?
Well, my reaction is that I'm not surprised, because I believe we have a consensus in Washington that's based on policies that are going to take us right over the edge, massive deficits that they don't want to do anything about. They just like to argue about and point fingers at each other. And the idea that we can allow a rogue central bank of 12 people sitting on that Fed board today to basically run the economy. They're basically a monetary politburo that have more power over the U.S. economy and of Wall Street and the financial markets than the old Soviet Union politburo ever had itself. And when we break down the financial system, we make interest rates simply pegged numbers that the Fed picks out of thin air, which is how we get interest rates today. That's not supply and demand. That's not the market. So everybody's mad about that, because I'm really calling out the fact that we're in a bubble. I'm also calling out the fact that there were many heroes historically along the way, starting with Calvin Coolidge, who actually believed in balanced budgets, starting with Eisenhower, who did it again, adding great secretaries of the Treasury like Bill Simon, who did fight in the 70s to cut budgets. Volcker stopped inflation. And even at the end, we had Republican appointees like Sheila Bair on the FDIC, who tried to stop the bailout and the Goldman gang from bailing out their own chestnuts, and of course was just ignored and shoved aside. So we're in a great historical struggle, and the three principles that are so important, fiscal rectitude, free markets, and sound money, are losing, and that's why our economy is in such great trouble.
Well, I think it's an important book. I think it's one that everybody should read. The Great Deformation, Corruption of Capitalism. David Stockman, thank you so much for being on the program.
Enjoyed being with you. Thank you.
Thank you.